do not.
I agree with me. Yes, that's true.
Congratulations on your,
Is this laughing Kamala remark? It's such a sexist remark.
I despise capitalism, and I despise how it bleeds into the familial structure. Like, I hate nuclear family structure.
MrBeast weighs in on politics, Ben Shapiro goes to Congress, The View goes viral again, and a TikToker's insane rant about the nuclear family. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my daily podcast where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics and across the internet from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around. Don't forget to hit that like button to reward my suffering for your entertainment. And do leave a comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. So up first, if you haven't heard the name MrBeast, then you must not be a very avid YouTube user or have any young kids who are online. Because he's one of the biggest YouTubers ever and makes some of the most viral content ever seen. He's a true internet celebrity, and usually his videos are completely apolitical and just kind of interesting, crazy challenges or charitable stunts that he does or other kind of stuff like that. But on his Twitter account, he'll sometimes stray into somewhat political territory, and that's what he just did. He recently tweeted, "If we lower the age to run for president, I'll jump in the race." He continued, "If I were president, I wouldn't care about party lines. I just always truly make the American people my number one priority. For problems I'm ignorant in, I'd have experts from the left and right advise me on them and try to find the middle ground that's best for America. I wouldn't be buyable. I don't care about doing things just because my party says I should, and I would focus on uniting the country instead of dividing it. Anyways, we can pick this up in 15 years when I'm old enough to run." So a lot of people saw this and were like, yes, finally, common sense, or yes, MrBeast, I wish everyone could just see this common sense approach. And my reaction was slightly different. I'll be honest, I like MrBeast. He seems like genuinely a good guy, but I rolled my eyes the second I saw this tweet. As you guys know, I'm a big advocate for staying in your lane, and posts like this make it clear that MrBeast is not very familiar with politics, shall we say, and hasn't deeply thought about many of the issues dividing our country and causing all the political dysfunction that he's noticing. For example, the idea that we just need somebody who will actually make the American people their priority. Well, everybody thinks that that's what they're doing. Democrats think that's what they're doing. Republicans also think that that's what they're doing. On most complicated issues, there's not one clear answer that puts the American people first and another answer that just puts corporations first and all our sellout politicians just choose the corporations every time. That's a cartoonish and toddler level analysis of American politics. Let me give you guys an example. The Trump administration cut corporate taxes. Now, Democrats would look at that and say, on one side, you have the people who want to cut taxes for the rich, and on one side you have people who are advocating for the American people. But on the other side, they'd say, well, hang on. Cutting these taxes will create jobs for everyday Americans, and a significant chunk of the corporate tax is borne by workers through lower wages. At the core of the debate is a fundamental disagreement about what is best for the American people. It's not just that the people in power are all bad and don't care about what's best for the public, and we just need somebody who actually cares about the people. In the same way, I have to roll my eyes at this idea that in problems he's ignorant in, he'd just bring in experts from the left and right and find a middle ground. That sounds great in theory, but a lot of things, there is not really a middle ground. You either do it or you don't. And even when there is a middle ground, the more common reality that happens when you actually try to pursue that is both sides just end up hating you and getting mad at you. A good example of this is the recent attempt to pass immigration reform legislation through Congress. Far-left activist groups attacked the Biden administration and the Democrats and the Republicans who were promoting it as being, xenophobic, extremists. But on the other side, border hawks attacked them as being insufficiently hard on immigration, and this was an amnesty bill, and they just ended up pissing everyone off and the bill went nowhere. So it's not as simple as finding a middle ground and it will all work out. And when MrBeast says that he wouldn't be buyable, he wouldn't care about doing things just because his party says he should, and that he will focus on uniting the country instead of dividing it, well, that's lovely. And I really believe that he thinks that's true. But I'll be honest with you. So does everyone who goes into politics, thinks that that's what they'll do. Then they get into office and the power corrupts them, and the desperation to be reelected consumes them. One point that people were making in the comments of MrBeast's posts were that it's strange that we have a minimum age to be president, but not a maximum age. And I agree with that, actually. I would fully support a constitutional amendment setting some sort of maximum age on the office of the presidency. Maybe that's how we can unite the country. After everything we've seen in recent years, I feel like we should all be able to agree at putting a cap somewhere. I still like MrBeast, and I honestly think he's an interesting guy, but I will never not cringe when people offer up these super simplistic takes on politics that are so clearly out of their depth. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And now, speaking of people being out of their depth, let's talk about a clash between the conservative commentator Ben Shapiro and the California Congressman Eric Swalwell. So Ben Shapiro, whether you love him or hate him, or agree with him or disagree with him, and I disagree with him on many things, is a very good debater and is very good at thinking on his feet, and he's not somebody you want to clash with unless you're really prepared. But Congressman Swalwell, who is something of a cartoonish Democratic representative, decided to go for Shapiro's throat and try to pull a gotcha with receipts on him or something. So Ben Shapiro was at the House Judiciary Committee to testify in a hearing about media and censorship. But Swalwell decided to try to bring up his position on the morality of homosexuality in a very bizarre gotcha exchange that did not go well for the congressman. Take a look.
Banning same-sex marriage. What about that part?
I am in favor of traditional marriage between a man and a woman, and I am perfectly fine with anyone having any sort of voluntary sexual arrangement they seek. That's a different thing from whether the government should attach benefits to that personal relationship.
But you think it's a sin to have same-sex marriage?
I mean, I'm confused. Are you asking me as a religious Jew what I think about biblically?
I'm just asking, is it a sin to be gay?
Is it a sin to be gay? I mean, how long do we have here? 2 minutes? I mean, if the basic idea is that sexual orientation is up for government regulation, I'm not in favor of the government regulating the private consenting sexual activity of adults. That is a different thing, once again, from whether the government ought to engage in actual benefits for particular sexual arrangements that adults make.
But again, just you to me, is it a sin or not?
From a religious Jewish perspective, orientation is not a sin, but activity is. That's also the same perspective of most major religions, so far as I'm aware.
And just because we found some receipts, you did say, I think homosexual activity is a sin.
Yes, I'm a religious Jew,
I'm
that's
sure
true.
there's a genetic component.
You found me out.
Orientation. But the view of all religious people I know has always been that sexual behavior is something that is up to you. And you said, I may have a desire to sleep with many women, but I do not.
I agree with me. Yes, that's true.
Congratulations on your, I'm sure it's very hard to restrain yourself.
The gentleman's time has expired, and I remind him of the first rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging.
So I laughed out loud when Shapiro said, yes, I agree with myself, how I feel when I watch my content. Now, obviously, I don't agree with Ben Shapiro's views about homosexuality. I don't believe that it's a sin. I don't share his faith. But it's really weird that he thought this was going to be some kind of gotcha. Like, obviously, that is what Shapiro believes. He's never hid that. He's been very open about that. That's what his faith says. It's what he's stated and continues to state. So the blow-up poster he had made with the receipts and all of this just failed spectacularly. But more importantly, why was it even relevant? The hearing is about media censorship and the media industry, but you're pulling an irrelevant gotcha that's not even a gotcha? The whole thing was incredibly lame and embarrassing for Swalwell. I found it really funny how at the end, the chairman was like, stop digging. And to me, it was a sad reminder of how cartoonish and clownish our Congress has become. So many times you see viral clips from these congressional hearings where our elected representatives are just pandering to the cameras, trying to pull dumb gotchas, and acting in totally undignified and unserious ways. For me, this was just another example of that unfortunate trend. Up next, the ladies at The View are going viral again after one of them dropped an interesting take about Vice President Kamala Harris. Apparently, the people who have criticisms of her and make fun of her weird cackle that she does are all just sexist men worrying that women will laugh at them in bed or something. Let's take a listen to what the ladies at The View had to say.
What really ticks me off about him, though, is this laughing Kamala remark. It's such a sexist remark because a guy I was with over the weekend, a friend of mine, that said Kamala's laugh annoys me. Remember they said that about Hillary's laugh, that she was cackling. And men, they don't like a funny woman. We're afraid if you laugh or you make a joke that maybe you'll do that when they're in bed with you. It's like this fear of women's laughing and comedy. Yes.
That's very good psychotherapy.
And what was
Okay, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's not, in fact, very good psychotherapy. What Joy Behar suggests in this clip is pretty stupid, but I'll just open up by saying, can't use that one against me, my friend. I, too, think that Kamala cackles, and she does cackle. To say that she cackles is not a sexist statement. It is an observation of fact, guys. She does a weird cackle. We've heard it over and over. And if any politician did it, they would be ridiculed for it. People would find it cringeworthy.
Good.
Now, I'm not against acknowledging that female politicians are treated differently and sometimes held to unfair standards. I'm really not. But this cackling incident it's just not one of them, guys. Kamala Harris genuinely does have the charisma of a wet blanket. Not because she's a woman, because she's just bad at this. If Kamala Harris had been a male senator from California, she would not have been selected by Joe Biden as vice president nominee in 2020. She would not be in the vice presidency today. These are just facts, and facts can't be sexist. You don't have to take my word on it, guys. It's not a hypothetical. Biden openly said at the time he was only considering women to be his VP. So she's actually the massive beneficiary of sexism, of an identity politics obsessed selection process where merit was discarded in favor of gender-based discrimination. With that context in mind, it's all the more laughable to try to portray Kamala's shortcomings in the charisma department as just being perceived because of sexism. She literally owes her job to woke sexism. I don't know. The hosts at The View and just liberal media personalities more broadly have got to get over this idea of thinking that everyone who disagrees with them is just some form of hateful bigot corrupted in their thinking by some ism. Like, it might actually just be that they're good people who disagree with you. I'll never understand the level of arrogance and condescension that these folks have for people who come down on the opposite side of complicated questions. But what do you think? Do you find Kamala's cackle cringeworthy, or are you just a sexist man who's afraid of her in bed or something? And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and stick around, and do hit that like button as we go along to reward my suffering, and do comment. I will read the comments later. Now today, we're going to react to a genuinely bizarre rant wherein one TikToker explains how the nuclear family is bad and racist, I guess.
Okay, small rant because I'm getting pissed, and when I think about it, it stirs up anxiety and anger in my stomach. But I despise capitalism, and I despise how it bleeds into the familial structure. Like, I hate nuclear family structure. I have so much respect for single parents, but at the same time, because of capitalism and white supremacy, they are set up to be terrible parents. Set up to be the worst parents, actually. But also, even in the nuclear family with two sets of parents, regardless if it's mother, father, two fathers, two mothers, set up for failure. And don't even get me started on white parents, because they literally disown their children when they turn 18, which is horrendous.
Excuse me?
And I also have smoke for wealthy parents. Let's cue Frank Ocean's super rich kids, because a lot of wealthy parents think like just contributing to their kids' life financially compensates it all. Like, no, babe, you gotta emotionally be there. And I'm looking at you, deadbeat dads. Can't just buy your daughter a brand new car on her 16th birthday and think that settles shit. Like, like parenthood is so frustrating. And then people have the nerve to be like, if you don't have a kid, don't speak on it. But I am a kid, bitch. It's just so frustrating. And like, shout out to my partners, shout out to my best friends, and shout out to my sisters, because we're all living on a commune, and that's how the family structure should be. When people say it takes a village, that's just not like talking shit. Like, it really takes a village. And why don't people understand that? We need the grandmothers, we need the aunts, we need the uncles, we need the close friends, we need the cousins. Like, you can't raise children with just 2 guiders, you know? But I'm pissed. For children who are marginalized, for parents who are marginalized, for everyone.
So there were a couple things in there, like a couple little nuggets I actually agree with, mixed in with a whole lot of crazy. First and foremost, I can't really understand why somebody would hate the nuclear family, the 2 parents household structure with kids. Because across all societies, including non-white societies, including non-capitalistic societies, it's statistically the best environment for kids to grow up in and leads to the best outcomes. Like, this is just a fact. In single parenting, I want to be clear about this because I feel like single parents sometimes get a bad rep. They do their best. But the reason that single parents, kids raised by single parents, on average have worse outcomes isn't because of capitalism. Again, this is a phenomenon we see across societies. It's because you only have one person, whether that means one income instead of 2, and then fewer resources and opportunities and a lifestyle that is going to lead to a child's success, or whether it's the division of labor and having somebody around to read to the kid and who doesn't have to be catching up on sleep after the late night shift. It's like having 2 people involved in this is, of course, going to be more productive and efficient on average than having one person trying to do their best and often making a heroic effort to do it all. That's why I think, with perhaps the rarest of exceptions, most single parents don't want to be single parents. It's an unfortunate circumstance they've found themselves in, and they're doing their best, but it's not like that was the desired outcome for most people. And what on earth were those generalizations about white parents disowning their kids at 18? Like, babe, what are you talking about? If anything, I think the opposite is increasingly true these days, where you'll find 25-year-olds living at home with their mom in, the rich white family they grew up in or something. But again, it's stupid to generalize about any group. So honestly, I don't even want to say that much. You can't make just blanket statements about white families or black families. Like, they're all different. There's a huge range, and they're not all the same, and they don't all do the same things. Also, I have to say, the least surprising part of this video was when she said that she and her partner, who is a man, by the way, live on a commune. Like, this is my shocked face. I do agree with the bit where she says, the whole it takes a village thing. You need more than 2 people to raise a child. But like, the nuclear family has never been at the expense of grandparents and cousins and other people that can be involved. I don't really get the dichotomy there that she's insisting exists, where I don't really see one. And again, what does that have to do with capitalism or whiteness? I feel like these people just play Mad Libs where they insert the words capitalism and whiteness just into random sentences about whatever topic they're discussing. And I ultimately do agree with her that the whole "you're not a parent, so you shouldn't talk about this thing" is stupid. I mean, she shouldn't talk about this kind of thing or most other things. Not because she's not a parent, because she's absolutely delulu. You let me know what you thought of that video, and if you also lost brain cells while watching it. And now, before we wrap up today's show, I'll read a few of your comments you left on yesterday's episode. One person says, "Leave the Supreme Court alone. Every president has had to live with decisions they don't like. That's just how it goes." I agree with you, and I really am sick of this approach to politics where people want to rip things up just because they don't get their way. It's always so short-sighted because the constraints and checks and balances that they're destroying aren't going to be in place in just a few years when power changes hands, and they're going to live to regret it. But I feel like short-term thinking is just an absolute epidemic in our politics right now. Another person says, I'm surprised Brad didn't mention the FDR era talk about court packing. Yeah, I usually do mention that when I discuss court packing because I actually think it's a great example of how court packing is a dictatorial measure. FDR was a wannabe dictator. Remember, he rounded up Asian-looking people and put them in camps. And when the Supreme Court tried to strike down parts of his agenda, he essentially threatened them with court packing, threatening to blow up the court as we know it. And in response, to try to avoid that outcome, they basically flipped their rulings. And so this commenter makes a good point that even if Elizabeth Warren and other people are saying this, but it doesn't go through, it's still a threat. It's still something that is exerting undue influence on the court. And it's really not an appropriate or fair way to approach the discourse over the Supreme Court. You're basically threatening them with their destruction, and they're probably going to be affected by that, even if it ultimately isn't immediately forthcoming, just because maybe they'll start to second guess their decisions. Will this give more strength to the people who want to destroy the court? I mean, it's a really scary prospect. So good point to this commenter. Another person writes, I don't comment very often, but you're extremely level-headed, and I can't find a level-headed breakdown of Project 2025. I totally understand not wanting to tackle it because it's a lot. However, I'm seeing a crazy uptick in fear-mongering and misinformation in general, and I can't seem to find any sources from legacy media that isn't fear-mongering. Would you be open to a request for a breakdown of this and why everyone is freaking out over it? Yeah, definitely. I am considering doing one. It's just I wouldn't want to do one just based on the Cliff Notes version of what everyone's talking about, and the actual document is I think 1,000 pages long or something crazy. So I want to do it, but it's just whether I can find the time to really do a comprehensive breakdown, because I wouldn't want to do it if I was just going to do a Cliff Notes version. Another person says, Brad, love ya, been recommending your channel to a lot of people. This is from a woman veteran. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for watching, and thank you for your service. You really appreciate it, honestly. Another person says, Brad, are you not going to comment on the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity? It's rather a huge issue, but I don't recall you having talked about it since it happened. I did briefly discuss it in one episode during the comments mailbag section, but I haven't done a deep dive, in part because everyone else has covered it, and it's incredibly complicated, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. Another person says, okay, Brad, you say that you always respond to comments, but I have an incredibly serious question for you. What's your opinion on mint chip ice cream? I like mint chip or different mint kinds of ice cream, but it's definitely not my go-to. My go-to is something with a combination of chocolate and peanut butter and hot fudge. Another person says, Brad, this question may turn into a video or it may not. It's kind of a two-part question. Maybe you can answer it quickly. What makes you center-right versus right-wing? What beliefs do you have that normal right-wingers don't have? I myself am center-right as well. Were you ever on the left? There are a few great videos on why people left the left, and I think you should do one if you were once considered a leftist. Well, I've seen many of those videos, and trust me, they do crazy numbers, so I probably would have considered doing one if that was my story, but honestly, it's not my story. I was never really on the left. I was kind of apolitical in high school, and then, as I've talked about elsewhere, I went to a crazy left-wing college, and it kind of pushed me in the opposite direction. And then I came more towards center-right positions and moderate positions over time. So I'm not going to do I left the left video when I didn't leave the left. It just wouldn't be true or authentic. As far as the difference between my views and genuinely right-wing views, well, I could do a whole video explaining that. And if you watch this show, I think issue by issue, story by story, you might start to piece it together. But the extremely short version is that I would say I'm more moderate on social issues. And then I'm also not on board with the Trump worship or honestly borderline cult-like mentality among some, not all, Trump supporters that sees him as above any criticism and having no shortcomings. And in the same way, the right wing increasingly has kind of a conspiratorial bent, at least many major figures in it, that I just don't share. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me. Don't forget to hit that like button on your way out, comment with your thoughts, subscribe, yada, 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 and we'll talk again tomorrow.